Morning, everyone. So, we're finally there. We have reached number 19 on my Richard Lehman discussion list, which means we're now halfway through this Lehman list. And the good thing about it is that all 19 books now that I've got to talk about are books on the positive side of Lehman's list, which means I think he's written 19 good books, which isn't bad going if half your publication is solid. And yeah, all these books are either decent, good, or great, and we'll go through that ascending order in time. But I'm starting off at number 19 with the very first book that was released after Lehman's death, although written clearly in his lifetime, and a fan favourite of many. It's Night in the Lonesome October, released in 2001. Night in the Lonesome October is a book that, along with its preceding book, which I haven't discussed yet, The Travelling Vampire Show, but it's a book that I definitely will get around to talking about in due course. It's a book that, for me at least, really does showcase the change in writing style that Lehman was going through. He was going through a style where he was very reminiscent of being young again, sometimes taking you back to his childhood, sometimes dealing with other people's youth, and focusing on characters, with the horror aspect being a secondary part. These last few books he released, in his lifetime, were very different to his splatterpunk era earlier books. They're almost like coming of age novels with a smatting of horror elements, but they're very different to the sort of really gruesome early stuff. And the writing in them is definitely a step above the majority of stuff he did. He seemed to be very much pining for better days, or maybe quite nostalgic at this point. And it's also telling because there's a few books that he's written since he died, his posthumous books, and there's one more that I haven't discussed yet, which I will do. The best one of his posthumous releases, actually. But they feel very different to these latter day books. They're very clearly earlier books from an earlier time in Lehman's life. And I think had Lehman not died tragically young, he was only 54 when he died, he would have continued along this sort of line of work, writing books that were very much character studies with horror elements in them. But I think potentially Lehman's best book was never written. I think he was definitely going to continue both with this cycle, and there was at least one more splatterpunk book Lehman was going to jump down, which we'll get to that in due course. But yeah, it's a bit of a shame, really, because this was a different direction for Lehman. And Night in the Lonesome October is a fan favourite, and I think it's a fan favourite because it's more accessible than a lot of his more gruesome, violent stuff. It's a story that we can all relate to, really, with a guy, I think his name's Ed Logan. He's been dumped, he's heartbroken, he's feeling really sad, and he goes out at night for a walk to clear his head. And I think it's something that's very relatable, because it doesn't matter if you're male or female, we've all experienced heartbreak and loss. We've all been there when we're young and we're in love with somebody that doesn't care about us, or at least that their feelings aren't what we thought they were. And that comes across quite well with this story. What doesn't come across quite so well is the manner in which Ed Logan actually goes about things, because this guy, he's quite a, I wouldn't say he's obnoxious. He's not a Rupert from the island, but he's definitely a slightly unlikable character in the fact that what he effectively does here is stalk somebody, and he's very self-centered, and he's quite egotistical, and he's quite selfish, and he's not a great hero. He's not somebody that you can really like, although he's not an unpleasant, horrible human being, but he is somebody whose situation is relatable. And the story itself, despite the fact that Ed is a little bit sort of obnoxious, most of the other characters, there's a couple of female characters here that are really, really good, really interesting. I mean, Lehman often, I think I've said before, most of Lehman's best characters are females, despite the fact that I don't believe Lehman really understood the way women think, and he was quite misogynistic and sexist in a lot of ways. He was a writer of his time, and he wrote, predominantly it was men reading these books back in the day. Lehman's fan base is 50-50. There's as many men as women read his stuff and like his stuff, and I can absolutely understand why. But I think that he often wrote females are often described by their appearance rather than their character. And this book and Travelling Vampire Show are two of only a few books. There is one other I'll discuss when we get to it, one of his very, very best books, maybe even his best, which puts female characters as people rather than just objects who, it's body shaming or its appearance. Because male characters aren't described like that. Male characters are often very ordinary human beings that females jump on. Very strange. But anyway, I think the scenario, what I'm trying to say is the scenario here, it's not so much the male characters. The female characters are quite interesting and quite well written. And the scenario here is just quite odd. There's a lot of Ed walking around the streets and weird things happening. And really, I can't say much more about the story without really spoiling any part of it, which I don't want to. It's an interesting, predominantly well told, intriguing and strange story that, despite the fact that I'm not a big fan of Ed, the situation he's in is relatable, and we've all noticed that going out at night is very different to the day. I think a lot of us can fantasize or romanticize about the fact the world at night is different to the world in the daylight, and the darkness has its own way of making things appear different. There are people and things that only come out at night, and what Lehman's done is just taken it to the next level of strangeness. It is a shame that we do have two, not really spoilers, but one of the female characters does get themselves into the typical layman scrapes of sexual violence near the end of this, which we could have done without. It would have been nice to have a female character that isn't thrown into that sort of rape victim peril that it seems a bit lazy at this point to be throwing. And there's also I think there's a gay character in this who is described as very sort of lechy, and it's almost like Layman just assumes that all gay people are sex mad and will throw themselves at any male characters. Very sort of, it's not PC. Layman wasn't, he wasn't a modern writer. He wasn't progressive in his thinking, was he? But apart from those things, I quite like this story. I think it's an interesting, slow-paced but mysterious story that works because it's got some great characters in it, and it's not, like I say, it's not so much a relatable character, but it's a relatable situation, and the character studied to do with that. So, Night in the Lonesome October is my 19th place. The first book on this list that I would actually say is more than just okay. I'd actually think this is a pretty decent book. And again, a shame that this book came out just after his death, because I would have been interested to see where Layman would have carried on with books along these lines. It's a well-crafted, well-told story with a few elements that do showcase, Layman wasn't the best writer out there, but his imagination absolutely keeps this book going, and there's a relatability to it that makes it interesting as well. So that'll do it for me. That's why Night in the Lonesome October, 19th place. A pretty decent read, and the start of a series now of books where we're going to be getting better and better.